The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome. You watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. We have a packed show for you, and our big focus is on the Israel-Hamas war. The International Court of Justice today stopped short of ordering Israel to suspend its military campaign in Gaza, but said Israel must ensure with immediate effect that its military does not commit any acts which could fall foul of the Genocide Convention. In other words, the UN's top court ruled that Israel must take all measures to prevent genocidal acts in Gaza, but stop short of ordering an immediate ceasefire. The court delivered its interim ruling in South Africa's genocide case against Israel. However, a verdict on South Africa's allegation against Israel that it has carried out a genocide in Gaza could take years to come. Israel strongly denies the accusation, calling it baseless. It has accused South Africa of bias. The court did not agree to South Africa's request for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, something that will perhaps disappoint the South Africans and Palestinians alike. But by large majorities, the court's 17 judges ruled, amongst other measures, that Israel should do everything in its power to avoid killing Palestinians, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, or imposing measures intended to prevent Palestinian women from giving birth. Additionally, the court ruled that Israel must take measures to ensure humanitarian access to Gaza. It must prevent any destruction of evidence that could be used in a genocide case in the future, and it must submit a report to the court within 1 month. The International Court of Justice also expressed grave concern about the fate of the hostages being held by Hamas and called for their immediate release. Israel has reacted to this judgment with anger, as expected. Netanyahu has, in fact, slammed the International Court of Justice, once again calling these allegations baseless. Now, the court's rulings are in a sense binding, but there is no enforcement mechanism in place. Israel could simply choose to ignore what the judges have said altogether, but with diplomatic efforts now concentrating on the possibility of a longer ceasefire compared to the last one, which lasted all of 1 week, and efforts still being made to improve the flow of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, Israel may argue that it's already taking steps to meet the court's demands. In fact, it has made that argument. Now, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, Israel's retaliatory attacks in Gaza have killed almost 26,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. The war began after Hamas attacked southern Israel on the 7th of October, killing about 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking 240 hostages. US media reports say the head of the CIA, America's intelligence agency, is due to meet Israeli, Qatari, and Egyptian officials in the coming days to discuss a new potential ceasefire in Gaza.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I again pledge as Israel's Prime Minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance and to do our utmost to keep civilians out of harm's way, even as Hamas uses civilians as human shields. We will continue to do what is necessary to defend our country and defend our people.
In battered, hard-to-reach North Gaza, rare aid deliveries are mobbed by hungry Palestinians. Aid workers report seeing people thin and visibly starving with sunken eyes. Hunger stalks the entire Gaza Strip, where 2.3 million people live under Israeli bombardment. The United Nations warned this week that pockets of Gaza face famine. Areas near the Egyptian border get limited supplies of imported food. But not the north, says World Health Organization Emergency Coordinator Sean Casey.
The food situation in the north is absolutely horrific. There's almost no food available, and everybody we talk to begs for food and comes to us and asks, where's the food?
Medics in Gaza hospitals describe babies born sick to malnourished mothers, infants losing weight, mothers unable to produce breast milk, and injured patients too weak from hunger to fight off infection. Jabbar al-Sha'ir is a paediatric doctor at An-Najjar Hospital in Rafah.
A month and a half ago, this baby's weight was 7.5 kilos. In a month and a half, he lost nearly 2 kilos. His weight is now 5.5 kilos. The mother and the baby suffer from malnutrition. No milk is available, which all impacts the growth of the baby. He lost 2 kilos. This is bad. It impacts his immunity. He constantly has inflammation in the chest and gastroenteritis.
Scenes of chaos and gunfire during an aid distribution in Gaza City in this video verified by Reuters.
Now the occupation forces are opening fire on citizens as they receive humanitarian aid in the north of the Gaza Strip, in Al Zaytun neighborhood. This is the sound of gunfire. These are the scenes.
At the start of the war, after a Hamas assault that killed more than 1,200 people, Israel announced it was cutting off all supplies to Gaza. It has since let in humanitarian aid, but far less is entering the enclave now than before. Palestinians interviewed by Reuters said they often went days without eating, or could only eat once a day. What food is commercially available is often unaffordable. In Khan Yunis, Palestinian mother Hannah Naufal is displaced, like most Gazans. She opens a single can of beans for her 5 children.
It has been nearly 100 days while eating this canned food. The children are suffering a lot and getting sick. The situation is really bad for them. They have a lot of diseases. We could not even bring medications for them. It is difficult to bring medications. What can I tell you? There are no supplies to buy. We are all depending on canned food, and the canned food is really bad.
No comprehensive data on hunger is available for Gaza, with aid agencies struggling to move and communicate amid the fighting. UNICEF projects that in the coming weeks, more than 10,000 children in Gaza risk wasting, one of the most serious results of malnutrition, which can stunt physical growth and brain development. Heather Stobor of Action Against Hunger says children are at highest risk of dying.
Severe acute malnutrition that you've mentioned before is the deadliest form of hunger, and it's the biggest threat right now in Gaza.
Aid agencies say Israeli checks are hampering aid deliveries into Gaza, and the military prevents distribution outside the southern area around Rafah. Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy has denied such limitations and put any problems down to UN distribution capacity.
If we look for a solution, it's always possible. It's only the will that's required. And I'm a true believer, because of my own experience, that war doesn't bring solution, except more war, more hatred, more agony, more destruction. Struggling to speak because the situation is beyond words. 70% of the dead are children and women. That alone is enough for a ceasefire. The risk of epidemics is increasing, and people will die because of that as well. And people are facing death or risk of death because of hunger and starvation and famine. If you add all that, I think it's not easy to understand how hellish the situation is.
All right, joining me at this point is Dr. Ido Zelkovitz from Israel and Ambassador Suresh Goyal, a former Indian diplomat. Thanks very much to both of you for joining me. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, let me start with you. The International Court of Justice has essentially said Israel must take all measures to prevent genocidal acts in Gaza. It said a number of other things which I mentioned at the start of the show, but for all the high sounding words that the top court has used, you know, it would seem like it's actually said very little, because the court could have asked for a ceasefire, but it did not. Frankly, I would say this interim ruling of the International Court of Justice comes as a huge disappointment to many people who were hoping that, you know, some important institution was going to finally read the Riot Act to Israel.
Yes, Neha. So what does one say on this, really? Frankly speaking, the decision given by ICJ is on the basis of majority of the judges who are there on the bench. They will take their cue from the various factors. Evidence has been presented, etc., both by South Africa and Israel. ICJ has decided in a particular direction without really asking for either ceasefire or declaring that it's a genocide. It has asked for Israel to ensure humanitarian access into Gaza, which Israel says it is doing, but on what basis, what, how, etc., is a different matter. So that's all I can say. It's a disappointment, yes. I think there were many countries who were looking for more on that account. South Africa perhaps could ask for, could again go to ICJ, ask for more, but I doubt very much that we can expect much more out of it, really. Yes, so I've said words which are meaningless, but yes, that is where we are.
That is where we are. And I think that really does say a lot about the relevance of multiple world institutions that we have today, whether it's the United Nations or the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court. We will dwell on that in greater detail, but after this quick break. Stay with us.
हमारी नारी शक्ति को सशक्त करने से ही देश सशक्त होने वाला है।
हर महीने महिलाओं को 1500 रुपए प्रति माह दिलवाया जाएगा।
What Nitish Kumar did to provide cycle to girls, so they could safely, quickly move out of the house, go to school, and quickly come back. Tring, 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 tring.
माँ अन्नपूर्णा तू ही, माँ अन्नपूर्णा है तू ही बीणा बादनी, हे शक्ति स्वरूपा जगदम्बा, हे नारी तू नारायणी।
News is now content. Just stream it. Download the world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to our Israeli guest, Dr. Ido Zelkovitz, head of the Middle East Studies, joining us from Haifa in Israel. Dr. Zelkovitz, you know, it's very interesting. The interim ruling that's been delivered today by the International Court of Justice has been interpreted by many different parties in many different ways. South Africa, in its initial reaction, has said that this essentially means that the rule of law matters and has been upheld. And then there are those who are actually very disappointed because they were hoping that at the very least the court would ask for a ceasefire, would order Israel to suspend its military operation in Gaza, given the number of people that have died. And at last count, almost 26,000, thousands of them women and children. But looking at it from Israel's viewpoint, while I know that Israel has been furious with South Africa over the allegation of genocide, which it dismisses as baseless, actually, come to think of it, this is not such a bad order from Israel's point of view. Because, you know, what Israel is saying, again in its initial reaction, is that we are already doing what the court says we should do. Could you please unmute yourself? Dr. Zelkovitz, we can't hear you. Could you please unmute yourself? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry for that. That can happen, you know. I thought that you don't hear me because of the time gap.
No, it was just your mic.
Together over it. Thank you. So hello, Nia, once again. Hi. I'm agree with whatever you just said. From the Israeli standing point, this is not a bad order. The fact that the court just gave Israel green line to continue with the war, it actually means that the court is agreeing that Israel is operating together hand in hand with the international law. If we are speaking about the appeals that the court just published, so 98% of them are going in line with the Israeli policy all along the way. Although we heard some, you know, harsh word from Israeli ministers and politicians, and this is what politicians do. But all along the way, Israel lets humanitarian supply to enter into the Gaza Strip. So in this sense, Israel stands in line with what the court ordered it. On the other hand, Israel is fighting while trying to do whatever it can in order not to harm civilians. Israel is fighting according to international law. Although we must say that this is a war, and in a war also some unarmed people are unfortunately getting armed, and Israel do whatever it can in order to target only the terrorist targets that it can find. The main problem is that Hamas is operating from a civilian environment, and also in contrast to the international law. Hamas terrorists are wearing civilian clothes. So taking all of that in mind, like you said, I think that although the number that Hamas publishes sounds very high, 26,000 people have been killed from the Gaza Strip, in the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the war. I must say that at least more than 1/3 of them, which means more than 10,000 human beings are unarmed persons that belongs to Hamas terrorist organization and the other terrorist organization that are fighting alongside with Hamas. So the situation is very complicated, and I think that the court realized it as it is. I must say that on the other hand, one cannot ignore that just the fact that Israel was submitted as a side into this court, I think in a cynical way, that create sort of I will say a problem for the Israeli diplomacy. I would say that the fact that the name of Israel goes by hand with the word
okay,
genocide is harming the Israeli images the Israeli image internationally, and this is what Hamas actually wanted. And in this sense, I'm very sad to see that a country with a huge and a great history of fighting for human rights, such as South Africa, is working in the favor of a terrorist organization. I think.
Okay, but you know, I have to come in here, Dr. Zelkovitz. You're entitled to your opinion, and you know, I know Israel has accused South Africa of bias, but you know, to accuse anybody who speaks out in favor of innocent Palestinians, Palestinian civilians, to accuse them of being in support of Hamas, a terror organization, that is an argument that I fail to understand. You know, I as an individual could have a strong stand against Hamas's terror activities and everything that they did in Israel on the 7th of October, and I could equally be horrified by the killings of innocent Palestinians. The two are not mutually exclusive, and condemning the killings of innocent Palestinian civilians does not make me an apologist for Hamas. And perhaps the same goes for South Africa, even though I don't hold a brief for South Africa. And yes, a lot can be said about how South Africa has refused to condemn Russia, for example, for its invasion of Ukraine. Many have been critical of South Africa for its closeness to Putin. But that is a different matter altogether. And unfortunately, we see these sorts of hypocrisies and duplicity in foreign policy all too often. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, isn't that true? But you know, coming back to this order itself, you know, even though institutions like the International Court of Justice have no mechanism to enforce their rulings, at the end of the day, they still carry a very high degree of moral authority, which is why you still have countries turning to these institutions in times of crises. But unfortunately, the interim ruling that has come today is not even a slap on the wrist for Israel. You know, while we did not expect the court to go ahead and hold Israel guilty of genocide today, the fundamental question that's being asked is, what stopped the International Court of Justice from ordering a ceasefire in Gaza?
There were two parts of it, really. First of all, ordering a ceasefire or ordering basically for the military action to stop, for the humanitarian assistance to get through to the people in Gaza, and the other was genocide. Clearly, the ICJ has chosen not to pronounce on any of those, and the politics is part of it. It will be interesting to see later on, when we know who has voted how, then we will know how much role have the national governments had to play in the kind of voting pattern at the ICJ. And eventually, ICJ does represent the collective wisdom of the member nations. Therefore, in that sense, I don't think we can, unlike in the case of Supreme Court of India or the national courts, where you expect an apolitical kind of a performance, here in this case, I don't think that is going to happen. We remember what happened in the case of Philippines and China. Number two, the important thing really here is that even if ICJ had decided otherwise, how would it have been actually given effect to? You talk about moral authority. Even the moral authority doesn't really pay much or is not very persuasive here in that sense. Israel, the USA has been calling on Israel for a long time to basically allow the humanitarian assistance or the need for it to get through to the people in Gaza. Israel has looked a thumb at the USA, which we thought had some kind of an influence on Israel, and said that no, the two-state solution in Palestine is not an acceptable solution to them, without using so many words. Therefore, ultimately, we have to look at the real politics here, and the fact here really is that all that I've done, and Israel is a great country, no doubt about this. We have great relations with them. But in this particular case of Gaza, I think there is a lot that perhaps Israel needs to answer for. You know, a country that has faced
a Holocaust in the past, ironically today being accused of carrying out a genocide of an entire people in Gaza. I'm completely out of time on that note. Ambassador Suresh Goel and Dr. Ido Zelkovic, thanks very much for joining me on Global Lens. Time for us to take a quick break here on the show, but don't go anywhere. On the other side, we have a special interview for you. Remember, India is celebrating its 75th Republic Day today. The chief guest, of course, was the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. So how significant is this visit? How important is it for the Indo-French strategic partnership? Remember, this was the 6th occasion on which a French leader was the chief guest at India's Republic Day. I discussed all of this and more with former Indian ambassador to France, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. That interview is coming up on the other side of this short break.
Somewhere I feel you're both a creator and a destroyer, like a Lord Shiva and Brahma in one. You created all these businesses, but finally most of the businesses either it has lost out on the way, even the successful one, you've lost control, or you in some other you've lost the leadership. Do you, like you are a creator, it was your own creation, do you also hold yourself responsible some way?
No business which was successful has been destroyed.
No, has been taken.
Ownership is a very different thing. The Zeal Entertainment Enterprise Limited or Z Media or Dish TV or City Cable or any of the businesses which I have created will never die.
Not die, but the control, you always wanted.
It doesn't matter, control, who's, you will never lose, you will never have a control. Ek din to khali haath jana hai. So I am not a control freak. I want to create things.
Why do you think the whole world always would have had his eyes on your businesses? And you have been throttling so many takeover bids. So you first befriended none other than Rupert Murdoch. And then you also stood up against him and said that India is not for sale. So why have people been so much enticed to come and take over your businesses?
Well, लड़की सुंदर होती है तो उसके पीछे बहुत लड़के आते हैं. If you have successful business, people will want to have that business.
You recently, in this Z Entertainment, with regard to that, you called me up and said that Barun, Z ko bachana hai. I mean, I obviously said that quite rightly, that I'm too insignificant for that. But what was the issue? Who were you saving Z from?
The people, those who wanted to grab the Z Entertainment.
No, but that's Invesco was coming in between the merger, right?
Invesco and the Invesco's supporter behind the scene.
So what happened?
They wanted to take over the business. And we wanted to save that, and we have succeeded to save.
But you saved, but Sony is still a multinational, right? It's still not an Indian company.
Now we have merged with each other. We are partners.
But they have the majority share.
They have majority, but doesn't matter.
Usually, you were very against multinationals. You wore your Indianness up your sleeves. But in this case,
Japanese are very different. They are like Indians.
So you have a problem with the Western world, and I think
I don't say Western world, particular individuals or particular kind of corporations.
Your shareholding has dropped from 41% plus to 4% in Zeal.
We will again increase our stake to more than 25%.
Oh, really? What about the double A's? Have the Ambanis made a takeover bid of Z Entertainment ever?
I will not like to comment.
You'll not like to comment.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Joining me now to discuss the significance of President Emmanuel Macron's state visit to India as a special guest, we are now joined by Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former Indian ambassador to France. A warm welcome, sir. Good to have you back on Global Lens. Let me begin by asking you a question about something that's been talked about a lot in recent days. It is well known that President Macron accepted India's invite to be the chief guest at the Republic Day parade at short notice after President Biden declined the invite. You said it was very magnanimous of President Macron to do so. Does this reflect how strong and robust this bilateral relationship is now?
Thank you very much for having me, Neha. No, I think it indicates three things. As I said, it certainly is indicative of President Macron's magnanimity to begin with. Second, I also think there is a personal chemistry at work here. I'm not sure Prime Minister Modi could have just picked up the phone, talked to any leader. I've always felt there were two leaders with whom he was particularly close. One was the Japanese leader, Shinzo Abe, the late leader, and the second was indisputably President Macron. I was at close quarters in 2017. I saw how they got along. They got along like house and fire. And I think there was personal chemistry at work. But I think more than anything else, it also indicates a degree of comfort and trust in the strategic partnership by both countries that we could actually call him and invite him at the last minute. And for him to reciprocate it and say yes, I think it indicates a certain amount of unconditional commitment to the strategic partnership. So that's how I see the invitation accepted by President Macron.
Very gracious of him indeed. Now, let me ask you about certain specific issues. India and France, as you know, are looking to conclude negotiations for the procurement of 26 Rafale marine fighter jets and 3 Scorpion-class submarines. Now, this could take a while. These negotiations are ongoing. Now, India's current ambassador to France has said Safran, the French weapons manufacturer, is willing to collaborate and share technology for the development of fighter jet engines with India. He in fact said Safran is ready for 100% technology transfer. How significant would that be in your view?
No, that would be hugely significant because for some time now, we have been conveying to the French side that a transactional buyer-seller relationship in defense is not sustainable over the medium to long term. We have conveyed to them that while we're extremely grateful for the kind of sales they have made, and those have been made with great sensitivity to Indian concerns, especially with regard to a neighboring country, to the West and other countries and so on. So while we're extremely grateful, we've made the point to them that it is simply not possible for us to buy this equipment from the medium to long-term point of view. Not just, I think there is a cost consideration, but also because it has to fit into our framework of Atmanirbhar, Make in India, in defense and so on. I think the French get it. And I think the three things that we should watch out for, I think we should have the joint statement in 1 or 2 hours' time. And you can take a look, I will take a look, we will all take a look. But I think the three things to watch out for, apart from the purchase of 26 Rafale naval aircraft, that will be a buying off the shelf proposition. But I'm talking of two other things. One is, as you rightly said, if Mazagon docks and Force Naval can make submarines with transfer of technology. The second is for the helicopter engine. Safran, as you rightly mentioned, is there transfer of technology? And is there 100%? I'd be delighted if that is the case. Last but not least, what are the plans for the joint development, the co-designing and the co-development of a fighter aircraft by both countries, which can then be not just manufactured in India, consumed by the Indian armed forces, but also sold to countries like UAE, with which you have a trilateral, India, France, UAE, but also countries like Qatar and Egypt, which consume a lot of French technology and French weaponry. So that's really the defense industrial partnership roadmap. That is the roadmap that I'm going to look for in the joint statement, which will be out shortly.
Okay. Now, there is no doubt that defense cooperation is possibly the most significant area of cooperation between the two countries. And talking about how important this partnership is. Would it be correct to say that France is one country that actually began sharing sensitive technology with India long before the United States took the decision to do so as recently as 2023?
Yes, that would be correct, Neha. I'll actually make two additional points. It's not just about sharing technology, which of course France has done. The fact is they have done it consistently, they have done it unconditionally, and they have done it not in an on again, off again fashion. With due respect to US, I think we have a wonderful relationship with US, which I respect. But if you take past history, there has been a history of on again, off again with US for whatever reason, the nuclear tests, relationship with Pakistan, etc., etc. We've, of course, reached a good level now. But in the past, with the US, it's been a case of on again, off again, because they have imposed sanctions on us and so on. I think with France, the key characteristic of the defense relationship has been constancy, uninterruptibility, and a certain unconditional commitment that the technology and the defense weaponry that they give to us, they will not share with those whom we consider as adversaries. So that is the key distinction between France and the rest of the defense suppliers that we have.
Quite right. Sir, I want to talk about another very specific issue, which was topical and a matter of huge concern for the entire world. We've been told, there was a press conference addressed by the Foreign Secretary earlier today, and he mentioned that Prime Minister Modi and President Macron, amongst other things, discussed the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, its various dimensions, the humanitarian crisis, the issue of terrorism, and also, of course, the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, which have caused major global trade disruptions. As we know, President Macron has emerged as one of the most outspoken critics of Israel's war in Gaza, somebody who's repeatedly called for a ceasefire. How, in your view, would the two leaders have addressed this issue?
No, I think they would have had a frank, heart-to-heart conversation about the subject. You're quite right in noting that France has been much more vocal about civilian casualties. They've called on Israel to stop doing what they are doing, or at least take into account civilian casualties. They have pushed for a ceasefire, for example, among the Western nations. They are one of the few countries to do that. So France follows an independent foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East and when it comes to the Palestinian issue. With India, Neha, I have to be honest with you, we are not a Security Council member. So it's not necessary, or it's not obligatory for us to kind of, call on Israel to do something. We have, of course, called for a peaceful solution, a two-state solution. We do that in multilateral fora. But I think you will agree with me that France has more agency and more clout in this regard. And therefore, France calls on Israel. They have a wonderful relationship, France and Israel as well. Bear in mind that France also has the largest number of Muslim inhabitants in Europe. So that also impinges on France's foreign policy. I think the conversation would have been interesting for me is what is France's assessment since President Macron made a trip to Tel Aviv and met President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I beg your pardon, he would have got a better sense of what Israel's plans are. These are important for India because a Middle Eastern flames will actually lead to an increase in the Brent crude, the oil price, and that would impinge on India's economy. We also have 9 million people working in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, so we don't want a widening of this conflict and making it a kind of a regional conflagration, if you like. And that is Israel, and that is France's objective as well. So no country now wants this conflict in Gaza to spread in the Middle East and subsume other countries. So there will be a joint interest between India and France. I have no doubt about it. But you're quite right. France will have the clout and the agency to be more vocal about it because they have permanent member of the Security Council. Bear in mind, I made this point elsewhere, these two leaders are now very senior statesmen, Neha. We tend to forget that Macron got elected in 2017. Prime Minister Modi has been in power from 2014. You can look around and see in democracies, these two are now very, very senior. They've been in power for a long time. So what they say counts. And in that sense, I think the conversation would have been important.
I think it would be safe to say that the India-French partnership has stood the test of time. You are somebody who has been at pains to point out that at a time when India was reduced to being an international pariah in the aftermath of its 1998 nuclear test, with Western countries like the US imposing sanctions on us, France was one country that stood by us, opposed those sanctions. France has also spoken in support of India at multiple international forums like the United Nations Security Council. Therefore, I'm sure you agree that France has emerged as one of the most reliable partners for India, hasn't it?
Yes, Neha. Allow me to make two big picture strategic points, since you referred to the big picture. First point, you have got the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, himself saying in the last meeting when External Affairs Minister Jaishankar went to Moscow, he acknowledged and he said, we have no problem with India diversifying its defense relationship with other countries. So now that he has made this statement on record and the Russians appreciate this, I would suggest to you that France by far is an excellent alternative for this strategy of diversification. So that's the first point I will make. The second point I will make, again, I don't want to be misconstrued. I think we have a great relationship with the United States, and that is a strategic partnership that we need, especially vis-a-vis China. And that is a partnership that I think we must pursue to the best of our ability. But I'll be utterly honest with you. I think in diplomacy, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't. So without prejudice to the excellent strategic partnership that we have with the United States, it is incumbent on us to develop a strategic partnership like the one we have with France, which is devoid of contention, which is not dependent on a third country. Yeah. There are views with regard to the relationship with the United States where I keep hearing, and you must have heard as well, that US wants to use India as a counterweight to China. You've heard that.
Absolutely.
I think with the French, the relationship, the strategic partnership stands on its own legs, on its own merit. And I therefore think that even keeping in mind the excellent strategic partnership we have with US, the relationship that we have with Japan and other countries, the relationship with France offers a certain quantum of stability, comfort, security that I think we need and we want. And that is why I think this is a relationship that needs to be cherished and cultivated.
It's interesting you bring up China because that was my next question. Yes, there is no doubt the United States does see India as a countervailing force against China. Perhaps so do many other Western powers today. And you say that the India-France relationship stands on its own legs. But looking at the Indo-Pacific region, France is an important player there. Do you believe that India, even if it's not viewed only as a counterweight to China, is still an important factor for France, or shall we say that when France looks at India, it does look at it through the prism of China, at least as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned?
I think that's an excellent question, Neha. You have to make a distinction between the land border that India has with China and the maritime theater in which we are cooperating. And I'll explain the distinction if you allow me. On the land border, it is clear to me that India is on its own. It's eklo chalo. Nobody else is going to put boots on the ground in Ladakh or in Galwan. We have to fight this battle alone. In the maritime theater, it's not about fighting China, but it's about keeping the sea lanes of communication open for trade and commerce. And you've seen the attacks by Houthi and so on in the Red Sea. We don't want that to happen in the Indian Ocean. So you are absolutely right. Most people forget that France has got the largest real estate in the Indian Ocean. You've got the Reunion Islands, you've got Mayotte, they've got bases. So what the two leaders did in July, which was not noticed sufficiently by people here in India in July 2023, when Indian Prime Minister was the chief guest in the Bastille Day and armed forces marched past the Champs-Élysées, they have extended the theater of cooperation from Indian Ocean to Indo-Pacific. France and India have decided earlier the theater was Indian Ocean. Now, both countries have decided they will go beyond the Indian Ocean and do it for the whole Indo-Pacific. I think this is excellent news, frankly, because there is real convergence of interests in the maritime theater. Again, I underline to your viewers, not the land border. On the land border, we are on our own. But in the maritime theater, we've got the quadrilateral security dialogue, which is doing things, and United States and Japan naturally are more invested in the Pacific theater. Yeah. With France, I think we can do a lot more in the Indian Ocean. I have suggested that we should actually be making use of their army bases. There is so much of comfort between the two countries when it comes to joint exercises, interoperability, and so on. I think it's time we started making use of the bases to make sure that the Indian Ocean remains free, open, and inclusive. That is, I think, a vital interest for France as well, because a lot of French exports to Asia have to go through the Indian Ocean. So there is a vital commercial interest at stake. So do we, India for that matter. So I think there is a convergence there, which I think needs to be used. So you're quite right. Indo-Pacific will be a theater of operation and cooperation. I'm excited by the establishment of the Trilateral Cooperation Fund. Triangular Cooperation Fund by India and France in the last meeting, where India and France will cooperate with the littoral countries of Indian Ocean to help them meet goals with regard to climate change, with regard to sustainable development, with regard to ocean governance, with regard to fisheries. So I think there is a hell of a lot of cooperation, potential for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific theater.
Well, so the Indo-Pacific most certainly is a critical area of convergence and cooperation. Let me quote to you what Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, the former Foreign Secretary, told me yesterday. He said, that the India-French relationship is a more comfortable and equal relationship compared to the India-US relationship. You, of course, mentioned the on-again, off-again nature of the India-US relationship earlier in this conversation. He also talked about how, on the one hand, the US rolls out the red carpet for India and our Prime Minister. On the other hand, they miss no opportunity to lecture us about our human rights and this, that, and the other. And of course, given the Biden administration's support for Israel's war in Gaza, amidst the growing death toll, perhaps the US should really be the last country to lecture anybody about human rights. But is that a view that you share?
I believe that the Indo-US relationship is an important strategic partnership. We understand that there are voices in the United States which express themselves openly without inhibition in terms of religious freedom, democracy, and so on. The only principle I would use is, are they singling out India or they do it to other countries as well? And my argument, and I'm reacting to Ambassador Sibal and the point that you made, as long as the United States does this quote unquote lecturing and so on to all countries in the world, it doesn't bother me, because that is really something integral to the US political dynamic. That's the way I see it. I don't see it as particularly directed against India. It is something that they do, and I'm afraid it's something we have to live with. Having said that, with the French, it is true that there is a degree of comfort, as he said. I would add by saying there is an unwritten convention between France and India that we do not comment on the internal affairs of each other. We may take it up in private, and I have done that as well as ambassador. I won't be able to talk about it with you, but we've done a lot of things together where we privately tell each other that, listen, this is something that is affecting Indians. They can tell us there's something affecting French in India. Could you please do that? That is just in the nature of the French and Indian relationship. If you ask me what I prefer the French-Indian model, because diplomacy is not about avoiding differences. I don't agree with that. I think differences must be tackled, and every relationship is bound to have differences. The question is, how do you take up these differences? In the case of the French and Indian relationship, we take it up in private. I love diplomats to do their job back channel, and you focus upfront on strategic convergence. So that is, I think, the key difference between the two relationships.
All right. Now, the negotiations for an India-EU free trade agreement, as you know, have been stalled. And while Europe still largely sees China as a major trading partner, it is believed that the French view is that India could, in fact, help in rebalancing ties with China. Therefore, how much of a role do you believe France can play in making this India-EU free trade agreement a reality?
No, truth be told, I don't think France can do very much. They can play a constructive role by being reasonable in their demands vis-a-vis India for the FTA. But I don't think they can swing it all by themselves, because what you have to understand is it's a matter of what the Europeans call competence. And the competence is essentially mandate. The mandate for negotiating a free trade agreement lies with the Commission in Brussels. I'm not sure I will use the term that you used in terms of where the negotiations with FTA are. Yes, it's not making enormous progress, but that is because there are two things at stake here. One, there is going to be a new commission in June, July. There are elections for a new commission of the European Union. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is there are also elections in India. And therefore, everybody knows, European Union knows, that the tough decisions that India takes will only now happen after the elections in India. So that is the main reason, I think. The Europeans also gave me to understand that they are looking at our FTA with UK very closely. And the chances are our FTA with UK will get done before theirs. And therefore, that will give them an indication of how far India is able to go in some of these difficult areas like labor standards, environment, movement of natural persons, visas, and so on. So I think all in all, my best guess would be that this FTA with Europe is important for both. As you rightly said, European Union sees it as a way of de-risking from China. For India, it's a way of linking up to the West, because we haven't been able to join RCEP and so on. So this FTA is vital for both countries. I actually think there is a lot of geopolitical momentum behind the FTA. But we just have to wait and see. I think it should get done either end of this year or beginning next year.
Let's certainly hope so. Now, we've talked about multiple areas of convergence. There is one area of divergence, the Russia-Ukraine war. We know the two countries don't quite see eye to eye on that, though it hasn't impacted the relationship in any adverse way. But this would have, in all likelihood, figured in the bilateral talks as well. What's your take?
Absolutely. I think the two leaders would have definitely talked about it. The way I characterize this particular issue is that I think the French were clearly unhappy with the position we took in the beginning of not condemning Russia. No question about it. My sense, though, is that The French have come to understand India's position much better now, number one. Number two, the French have also let me know informally that, listen, perhaps we made a mistake. You guys are right. Right from the beginning, India has maintained that there should be a diplomatic solution to the problem, that there will be no military solution. Everything that has happened in the last 2 years or little under 2 years is that on the battleground, there has been no decisive winner. And this is what India has been saying all along. I think the Prime Minister said to Putin, it's not an era of war. We've been telling the European Union that please try and solve this problem diplomatically. There is no military solution. So there is an understanding on the French side that actually we were right about some of these things. Having said that, I would say that among all the European countries, France is arguably and curiously closest to the Indian position on Ukraine. Some of the other countries like Germany and so on are much more hardline. But Putin spent hours negotiating with, Macron spent hours negotiating with Putin, if you remember. So France also wanted a diplomatic solution. To the extent, I think I see both countries not too far apart, and they must have had an extremely interesting conversation about the situation on the ground in Ukraine.
All right. So final question before we let you go. India and France are marking the 25th anniversary of their strategic partnership. This is the 6th time that a French leader has been chief guest at India's Republic Day. But do you believe this visit has been largely ceremonial, high on symbolism, and a celebration of the friendship more than anything else, given that no big ticket agreements are being inked this time?
No, I think that would be wrong because, they met in July. And in the case of two bureaucracies, two governments, two nations, you can't say that in 6 months' time you must achieve something dramatic. I have made this point elsewhere that I see this summit meeting between President Macron and Prime Minister Modi as an implementation summit. I don't want fresh, new, groundbreaking decisions. Those decisions have already been made in July. I think if they can manage to make substantial progress in implementing the decisions which have already been agreed upon, I would consider this a huge success. But of course, you're right. There is definitely pomp, circumstance, and pageantry because it involves the Indian Republic Day. And I think it is also a signal to our other strategic partners that there is something constant and reliable about the strategic partnership, that, we are there for each other kind of thing. But I think if we can get implementation done on some of these big ticket items, I'll be extremely pleased with the outcome.
Okay. And some commentators have said that this also sends out the message that India has multiple powerful friends. Biden is not the only one, and that India and France are perhaps the new BFFs. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
No, like I said, I don't think it's about indicating to one single power. Mm-hmm. It's about demonstrating to our partners that we have a process of multi-alignment. Our foreign policy is based on engaging with all powers, and that this is an important partnership. That's the way I would characterize it.
A very important and reliable partnership indeed. On that note, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
Bangalore traffic is an example of something that has gone wrong with our system.
We have more than 50 flyovers in Bengaluru city. If flyover is a solution to traffic problem, Bengaluru should not have traffic problem.
According to TomTom Traffic Index 2022, Bangalore is ranked as the second worst city in the world when it comes to traffic.
The speed limit at the ORR is 80 kilometers per hour, but our vehicle has only moved
10 kilometers per hour.
What Bangalore needs is a surgery. But what we have been offered repeatedly are band-aids.
Only on the world's first news OTT. News 9 Plus. Ahead of the curve.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations